poisoner of my son. For this crime you die today." Kaelen's voice didn't shake. It never did. Rain hammered the execution platform, soaking through Lu Yan's prison robes, and above him the Duke's eyes held nothing. No grief, no doubt, just the cold verdict of a man who had already buried his love for this face. The crowd screamed for blood. Somewhere in the mass of soaked bodies, a child was crying. The blade rose. It fell. Everything went white. Before you find out what happens next, hit subscribe to Heartverse BL and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. 3 months earlier, Lu Yan opened his eyes to a ceiling he didn't recognize, in a body that felt wrong. Too thin, too weak, lungs dragging like they belonged to someone already halfway to dying. He sat up too fast and the room spun. "Careful," a maid's voice said flatly, not moving to help him. "You fainting again won't change anything." He knew this room. He knew that dismissive tone. He knew, with a sick drop in his stomach, exactly which novel he'd fallen into. The tyrant's fated bond. 600 chapters he'd devoured in his old life. And here he was. Inside the body of Lu Yan, the disgraced Omega spouse everyone forgot existed until chapter 40, when he'd be framed, chained, and executed in the rain. "How long have I been asleep?" he asked. The maid didn't look up from folding linens. Long enough that nobody bothered checking. That told him everything. In this house, he was already dead to them. He pushed himself out of bed, ignoring the way his legs trembled, and walked the halls like a stranger wearing a stolen life. Servants flinched from him. Doors closed a little too quickly as he passed. He was hated here, but not, he realized slowly, for anything he'd actually done. Not yet. Then he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it. A child's ragged breathing behind a locked door at the end of the west wing. "Who's in there?" he asked the maid trailing behind him. "The bastard son." She said it the way one might mention a stain on the floor. "Sickly thing. Master doesn't speak of him. Best you don't either." Lu Yan's blood went cold, because he remembered this. Run. The Duke's illegitimate 3-year-old, mentioned only twice in 600 chapters. Once when his mother died birthing him, and once more, 3 chapters before Lu Yan's execution, when the boy quietly died of neglect and nobody in the story so much as paused to grieve him. 2 forgotten deaths. Written 7 pages apart. "Open it," Lu Yan said. "Master's orders. Open it or I will." The maid hesitated, then relented, muttering that it wasn't her fault what happened next. The door creaked open onto a room with no fire lit, no warmth, a small huddled shape buried under a single thin blanket in the corner. Lu Yan knelt. Up close, the boy's face was flushed with fever, lips cracked, breath shallow and wet in a way that made every instinct from Lu Yan's old life, the one where he'd spent years as a doctor, scream at once. This isn't neglect. This is a child actively dying, and no one in this house has noticed or cared. "Hey," Lu Yan whispered, brushing damp hair from the boy's forehead. "I've got you now." The child's eyes cracked open, glassy, terrified, too used to being alone. His lips moved, barely a sound at all. "Mama?" Lu Yan's hand went still against the boy's burning skin. Behind him, the maid's breath caught sharply. And then footsteps. Fast, heavy, deliberate, shaking the floorboards of the entire west wing, growing louder with every second. "That's not possible," the maid breathed, backing toward the wall. "The Duke isn't due back from the front for 3 more years." Lu Yan turned toward the door, just as it slammed open. "What are you doing near my son?" The voice cut through the room like a blade unsheathed. Lu Yan turned to find a man filling the doorway. Soaked in road dust, armor still buckled from the front, eyes the color of winter iron fixed on him with a suspicion sharp enough to draw blood. Duke Kaelen. 3 years early. Exactly as terrifying as 600 chapters had promised. Ren's small fingers curled tighter into the fabric of Lu Yan's sleeve, refusing to let go even as the boy trembled. That, more than anything, seemed to stop Kaelen cold. He crossed the room in 4 strides and gripped Lu Yan's chin, tilting his face up, searching for the lie he clearly expected to find. "The letter said you hadn't left your bed in months. Too weak. Too spiteful to bother with the boy you were forced to marry into." His thumb pressed hard against Lu Yan's jaw. "Now I come home to find you in his room, and he won't release you. Explain." Lu Yan didn't flinch. In the original story, this was the moment the real Lu Yan would have wept, stammered, given Kaelen every reason to distrust him for the next 40 chapters. Lu Yan wasn't going to make that mistake. "Let go of my face and I will." Something flickered behind Kaelen's eyes, not quite surprise, but close to it. He released him, slow, deliberate, as if testing whether Lu Yan would crumble without the grip holding him up. He didn't. "Your son has been locked in a cold room with no fire for what looks like weeks," Lu Yan said, voice steady even as his pulse hammered. "He has a fever that hasn't broken, fluid in his lungs, and no one in this house thought that was worth mentioning to you. You expect me to believe you suddenly care. I expect you to send for a physician before you waste time interrogating me instead of saving him." Silence. Then Kaelen's jaw tightened, and he turned toward the door, barking an order down the hall. A name, Sue, and the promise of consequences if the man wasn't there within minutes. While they waited, Kaelen didn't look at Ren. He looked at Lu Yen instead, like a puzzle he resented not being able to solve on sight. "You've changed," he said quietly. Not an accusation. Almost curiosity. "People do that," Lu Yen said. "Given a reason." Before Kaelen could answer, old Sue arrived, the household's head physician, an older man with kind, tired eyes and hands that wouldn't quite stay still. He knelt beside Ren, checked his breathing, his fever, the faint blue tinge at his lips, and his expression shifted from professional calm into something closer to alarm. "Well," Kaelen demanded. "His lungs are compromised. The fever's been building for some time. This isn't sudden." Sue's gaze flicked toward Lu Yen for half a second before dropping to the floor. The Lord Omega's assessment was accurate. "You're certain?" "I am." Sue's hands trembled as he reached for his bag, refusing to meet anyone's eyes now, not even Ren's. "I'll prepare a tonic immediately. If you were suddenly thrown into a house full of strangers who wanted you gone, and only a sick child needed you, would you run, or would you stay and fight for him? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe to Heartverse BL so you don't miss what Lu Yen finds next." Kaelen watched the physician go before turning back to Lu Yen, something unreadable settling over his features. "You'll stay in the West Wing until I understand what's happening in my own house," he said. "Confined. No visitors. I want to know exactly what kind of person you've become before I decide whether to trust it." "Fine," Lu Yen said. "I wasn't planning on leaving him anyway." Kaelen's eyes lingered on him a moment longer than necessary before he left, boots echoing down the corridor. Only once the door shut did Lu Yen let himself breathe, and turned toward the physician's notes left hastily on the bedside table, still damp with ink. His eyes caught on a single line in the treatment history, and his stomach dropped. A poison signature. Faint old, deliberately buried in the boy's record. And it matched, stroke for stroke, the exact substance that was supposed to end up in Lu Yan's own hands 3 months from now, on the night of his execution. "He won't eat for anyone else. Do you understand what that means in this house?" The woman standing in Ren's doorway was older, sharp-eyed, arms crossed like she'd spent years bracing for bad news. Lu Yan had seen her twice before, always in the corners of rooms, always watching. "I don't," Lu Yan admitted, setting down the bowl of broth he'd been coaxing into Ren's spoon by spoon. "It means everyone will notice." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her with practiced quiet. "I'm Mira. I've kept that boy fed and breathing since his mother died, mostly by making myself invisible. You're doing the opposite." Ren, sensing the shift in tone, reached for Lu Yan's sleeve again, tugging until Lu Yan sat back down beside him. That alone made Myra's expression falter. Over the following days, the pattern held. Ren refused every hand but Lu Yan's. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, wouldn't let the fever tonics near his mouth unless Lu Yan held the cup. Slowly, the tight, frightened silence in his small face began to loosen. For days in, over a bowl of rice porridge Lu Yan had insisted be sweetened despite the cook's protests. Ren laughed, a real, startled, hiccuping laugh, for what Mira later admitted was the first time in over a year. "You should be careful how attached he gets," Mira said afterward, watching Ren finally drift into an easy sleep. "And how attached you let yourself get back. Is that a warning?" "It's a fact." She lowered her voice. "This house doesn't like things it can't control. A boy who wasn't supposed to matter, suddenly thriving because of an Omega who wasn't supposed to care. That draws eyes. The kind of eyes that find reasons to remove problems." Lu Yan studied her. "You've been protecting him a long time. Longer than anyone here deserves credit for." Something flickered across her face, grief carefully worn down into routine. "I keep a record. Every injury nobody explained. Every meal that mysteriously never arrived. Every time this house decided quietly that this child was disposable." She met his eyes. "If something happens to him, or to you, that record won't stay hidden." Neither of them noticed the shadow shift near the cracked door. Kaelen had meant to check on his son before the evening council. Instead, he'd found himself standing just out of sight for nearly 10 minutes, watching a man he still didn't fully trust hum some foreign, unfamiliar tune while Run slept curled against his side like he'd never known a version of the world without him there. Something in Kaelen's chest, long since sealed shut, ached in a way he didn't have a name for. He left before either of them could see his face. If you had to choose between staying safe and staying close to someone who needed you, what would you choose? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Heartverse BL before Chapter 4. Later that night, after Mira had gone and Run was finally settled, Lu Yan returned to his own room to change the dressing on a scrape Run had gotten from a fall earlier that day. He reached into the medicine cabinet for antiseptic, and stopped. A vial sat where it shouldn't be. Small, dark glass, stoppered with wax the exact shade Lu Yan had seen on Ren's old treatment chart. His pulse spiked before his mind had even finished the thought. He lifted it with 2 fingers, careful, the way his old training screamed at him to handle anything unidentified. Tucked beneath it was a folded scrap of paper, the handwriting deliberately plain, disguised. Playhouse all you want. He still dies on schedule. Lu Yan's hand went cold around the vial. Someone in this house already knew exactly how this story was supposed to end, and they weren't going to let a little thing like Lu Yan changing the plot get in their way. Someone wants me dead, and they're using your son to do it. Lu Yan set the vial and note on the war table hard enough to make the maps beneath it shift. Kaelen looked up slowly, and beside him, a broad-shouldered man in half-armor straightened with open hostility. You walk into a war council with poison and accusations, the man said, and expect to be believed? Ro, Kaelen said, a warning in the single syllable. I'm asking a fair question. General Ro didn't back down, arms crossed, eyes narrowed at Lu Yan like he was calculating exactly how much damage this stranger could do. Convenient, isn't it? The disgraced Omega everyone expected to scheme suddenly hands over evidence of a plot no one else has seen. I could have hidden it, Lu Yan said, meeting his glare without flinching. Buried it, said nothing, let it surface later when it was too late to matter. I didn't. I brought it straight to him. He looked at Kaelen. That should tell you something. Kaelen turned the vial slowly between his fingers, studying the wax seal, the note, the deliberate anonymity of the handwriting. It does, he said finally. No one in this house has ever brought me a problem before I found it myself. His eyes lifted to Lu Yan's. They wait. They let me discover the wreckage after the fact. Sentiment, Ro muttered, isn't evidence. No, Kaelen agreed. But it's data. He set the vial down. I'll have it tested. Quietly. If someone inside this house planted it, I want them exposed before they know we're looking. Ro didn't look convinced, but he said nothing further, just watched Lu Yan with the flat, assessing stare of a man keeping score. Lu Yan felt at the moment he stepped out of that room. Something had shifted fractionally in the space between him and Kaelen. Not trust exactly. Not yet, but the first crack in a wall that had clearly been standing a very long time. He didn't get long to sit with it. That night, a scream tore through the west wing, small, ragged, unmistakably Ren's. Lu Yan was moving before he'd finished registering the sound, bare feet slapping cold stone, heart slamming against his ribs with a fear sharper than anything he'd felt since waking up in this body. He was fine hours ago. He was laughing. That should have been impossible. Fevers like Ren's didn't spike back this violently without cause. Not this fast, not this cruel. Every instinct from Lu Yan's old life screamed the same word before he even reached the door, tampering. If it were your child, and everything in you said something wasn't right, would you trust the people around you, or trust your instincts instead? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe to Heartverse BL so you don't miss what happens next. Lu Yan shoved the door open. Ren was seizing, small body convulsing against the sheets, eyes rolled back, lips already tinged blue. And standing over him, one hand still curled around the medicine cup he'd clearly just tipped past the boy's lips, was old Sue. The physician's head snapped up. For half a second, his composure cracked completely. No calm bedside mask, no professional detachment. Just raw, naked panic, and beneath it, something worse. Guilt. What did you give him? Lu Yan's voice came out low, deadly steady, even as everything in him screamed to move, to help, to fix this the way he'd once fixed 100 crises just like it. Answer me. Sue's mouth opened. No sound came out. His hand trembled around the cup, and behind Lu Yan, footsteps thundered down the corridor, Kaelen's voice already tearing through the dark demanding to know what was happening to his son. Turn him on his side, now. If he chokes on his own tongue we lose him in seconds. Lu Yan was already moving, hands steady despite the chaos, easing Ren's convulsing body onto his side the way he'd done 100 times in another life, in another hospital, under another name. Kaelen filled the doorway a heartbeat later, sword still in hand, eyes wide with a terror he clearly wasn't used to feeling. What's wrong with him? Something suppressing his breathing, probably in whatever Sue just gave him. Lu Yan pressed 2 fingers to Ren's throat, counting, timing the seizure against a clock only he could hear. I need warm water, and something bitter, vinegar, citrus, anything acidic now. If you were the one holding a dying child's life in your hands with seconds to decide, could you stay calm enough to save him? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe to Heartverse BL before the next chapter goes live. Mira appeared with a bowl before Kaelen had even finished shouting the order down the hall. Lu Yan worked fast, forcing the mixture past Ren's clenched teeth in careful measures, murmuring low and steady the entire time. Not medical instruction now, just comfort, the same wordless reassurance he'd once given frightened patients twice this boy's size. Slowly, the convulsions eased. Ren's breathing evened. Color crept back into lips that had gone the color of ash. Only when the danger passed did Lu Yen turn back towards Sue, who hadn't moved from the corner, hadn't stopped shaking. Who paid you? Kaelen's voice had dropped to something far more dangerous than shouting. I didn't want to. Sue's composure finally shattered completely, words tumbling out unpolished, unrehearsed. They said it wouldn't kill him, just enough to make it look like neglect, like the household failed him again, enough to give grounds. He stopped himself, too late. Grounds for what? Lu Yen pressed. For someone else to have a claim to him. Sue's eyes darted to the door like the words themselves might get him killed. Someone protecting the true heir's interests. That's all I know, I swear it, they never gave a name. Kaelen's jaw tightened, a muscle ticking beneath cold restraint. Take him. Lock him in the east cell until I decide what to do with a man who nearly murdered my son. Guards dragged Sue out. The room went quiet except for Ren's slow, even breathing and the aftershock trembling through Lu Yan's own exhausted hands. Hands that had just spent the last hour holding a child's life together through sheer will. He didn't realize how badly he was shaking until his knees gave slightly, and Kaelen caught him before he hit the floor. I'm fine, Lu Yen murmured, though his voice betrayed him. You're not. Kaelen didn't argue further. He simply lifted him, no servant summoned, no hesitation, just the careful, deliberate weight of his own arms, and carried him down the hall to his room himself, ignoring the startled look of a passing maid. I can walk, Lu Yen protested weakly, even as his head tipped against Kaelen's shoulder despite himself. You've done enough tonight. Something in Kaelen's voice had changed, rougher at the edges, like it cost him something to say plainly. Let me do this much. He laid Lu Yen down with a gentleness that felt almost foreign on a man built for war, drawing the blanket up, lingering a moment longer than necessary at the edge of the bed. Lu Yan's eyes had already slipped shut, exhaustion finally winning. He almost missed it, the quiet words Kaelen breathed out, thinking himself unheard, thinking Lu Yen already asleep. The book was wrong about you. Lu Yan's eyes snapped open in the dark. Book. Not records. Not rumors. A book. He lay perfectly still, pulse hammering against his ribs, suddenly, terribly certain that the man standing over him knew far more than he should, and that whatever Kaelen had just admitted to knowing, it wasn't something either of them could take back. What book? Lu Yen hadn't meant to ask so bluntly, but exhaustion and fear had worn away his filter. Kaelen turned from the doorway, caught off guard. The household ledger, he said slowly, like the question itself was strange. My steward keeps records. Every servant, every incident, every rumor worth tracking. Yours was thick with warnings. Spiteful. Cold. Dangerous to my son. His eyes searched Lu Yan's face. None of it matches what I've seen since I came home. Relief loosened something tight in Lu Yan's chest. Not the confession he'd braced for. Not a man who somehow knew he didn't belong in this body, this story, this life. Just records. Rumors. Nothing more. So the book was wrong, Lu Yen said carefully. The book was wrong, Kaelen agreed, and for the first time, something almost like a smile touched his mouth. I don't enjoy being wrong. I intend to figure out why. He didn't leave after that. He lingered. Unusual enough that Mira raised an eyebrow when she brought supper up that evening and found Kaelen still there, seated across from Lu Yen instead of the war table where he belonged. You could eat in your own hall, Lu Yen pointed out. I could. Kaelen didn't move. If anything, he drew his chair fractionally closer. Close enough that Lu Yen caught the faint scent of steel and rain still clinging to him from the road. I find I'd rather be here. The admission sat between them, unpolished and plain. Exactly the kind of honesty Lu Yen hadn't expected from a man the entire empire called untouchable. Why? Lu Yen asked. Kaelen was quiet a long moment, turning a spoon slowly between his fingers like the answer required effort to excavate. I've never bonded with anyone, he said finally. Not properly. Not by scent. Every alpha in this empire locks that instinct down out of duty, but I locked mine down out of something closer to fear. Fear of what? Ren's mother. His voice didn't waver, but something beneath it did. She swore devotion. I believed her enough to let my guard down once. And the night she died, I learned everything about that devotion had been a performance for someone else's benefit. His jaw tightened. I've made certain never to feel that unguarded since. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to find out it wasn't real? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe to Heartverse BL. You won't want to miss what happens at the gala. Lu Yen sat with that, something cold sliding down his spine that had nothing to do with sympathy and everything to do with memory. The poison signature on Ren's chart, the note in his cabinet, someone protecting the true heir's claim. If Ren's mother's death hadn't been the accident this house believed it to be, then whoever orchestrated it 3 years ago might be the very same hand moving pieces now. What was her name? Lu Yen asked quietly. Something flickered across Kaelen's face, surprise maybe, that anyone had thought to ask. Celine, he said. She had a brother, devoted to her, or so he always claimed. I haven't heard from him since the funeral. A brother. Lu Yen filed that away carefully, a thread he didn't yet dare pull. Kaelen studied him too long after that, close enough now that Lu Yen could see the exhaustion beneath his composure, the loneliness he clearly never let anyone witness. You ask questions no one else bothers with, Kaelen said quietly. It's a dangerous habit around me. Maybe I like danger. The corner of Kaelen's mouth curved just slightly. Neither of them moved to close the remaining distance between them, but neither pulled away either, and for one suspended moment, the air between them felt heavier than either was willing to name. 3 days later, the ballroom of Kaelen's estate blazed with candlelight, the household reintroduced to the Empire's court as whole again. A recovering duke, a devoted spouse, a healthy heir finally seen in public for the first time in over a year. Ren, dressed in small formal silks, clung to Lu Yan's hand as nobles murmured behind painted fans. Smile, Lu Yan whispered. Almost done. Ren managed a shaky grin just as a servant passed with a tray, just as the orchestra swelled, just as Lu Yan's eyes caught a glint of motion near the upper gallery. Too fast, too precise to be anything but deliberate. He didn't think. He moved, throwing himself between the boy and the arrow already screaming toward them, the world narrowing to a single, silent heartbeat before impact. Get down! Lu Yan's own voice barely registered over the scream of the arrow as it tore across his shoulder instead of Ren's throat, the impact spinning him sideways into the marble floor. Pain seared white-hot through his arm, but his hands never left the boy, curling protectively around Ren's small body, even as blood bloomed dark against his ceremonial robes. The ballroom erupted. Nobles screamed, scattering from the gallery's shadow, guards surging toward the upper balcony where the shooter had already vanished into the chaos. Lu Yen, Kaelen's voice cracked through the noise, raw in a way Lu Yen had never heard from him. And then he was there, on his knees on the ballroom floor in front of the entire court, hands shaking as they hovered over the wound like he didn't know where it was safe to touch. I'm fine, Lu Yen managed, though the words came out thinner than intended. Ren, is he? He's not hurt. You made sure of that. Kaelen's hands finally settled, one bracing Lu Yan's back, the other pressed hard against the wound to slow the bleeding. His composure, the legendary, untouchable control the entire empire feared, had cracked wide open in front of hundreds of witnesses. Don't you dare close your eyes. I'm not dying over an arrow graze, Lu Yen said, half laughing despite the pain, and something in Kaelen's expression fractured further at that. Relief and fear tangled together too fast to hide. That was when it happened. The scent hit the room like a wave, sharp, unmistakable, and Alpha's carefully suppressed instincts breaking loose all at once. Kaelen had spent years locking that part of himself down, and now, kneeling over Lu Yan's bleeding shoulder in front of the entire court, he couldn't hold it back at all. Nobles nearby stiffened, some stepping back instinctively, murmurs rippling outward. The Duke unguarded, for an Omega everyone thought he despised. General Rowe pushed through the crowd, sword drawn, eyes scanning for further threats, and stopped short when he reached them, taking in the scene. Kaelen's hands shaking around a wound, his scent raw and unguarded, Ren sobbing quietly clutched against Lu Yan's side. Rowe had spent weeks certain Lu Yen was a threat waiting to unfold. Watching Kaelen now, he understood he'd been wrong about which kind of danger this Omega actually posed. Perimeter's secure, Rowe said, voice rougher than usual. Then quieter, almost begrudging. Get him to a healer. Now, I'll handle the rest. Have you ever had a moment where everything you thought you understood about someone changed in an instant? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe to Heartverse BL. Chapter 8 is about to change everything. Kaelen lifted Lu Yen again, careless of the blood soaking through his own sleeves, carrying him from the ballroom floor while the entire court watched in stunned silence. He didn't stop until they reached a private antechamber, laying Lu Yen down on a settee with a gentleness that contradicted every rumor ever told about the tyrant duke. You threw yourself in front of an arrow for my son, Kaelen said, voice low, unsteady. Without hesitation. Without thinking of yourself at all. He's a child, Lu Yen said simply. There wasn't a decision to make. There's always a decision. Kaelen's hand came up, brushing hair away from Lu Yan's face with a tenderness that felt entirely at odds with the war-hardened man the Empire feared. You keep choosing him. Choosing us. I don't understand why. Maybe I don't need a reason. The air between them went taut, charged with everything neither of them had said aloud. The weeks of guarded distance, the vulnerability shared over supper, the scent still lingering unrestrained in the room around them. Kaelen leaned in slowly, giving Lu Yen every chance to pull away. He didn't. Their mouths met, not gentle, not careful, but fierce with the adrenaline still coursing through both of them, months of tension breaking loose all at once. Lu Yan's uninjured hand fisted in the front of Kaelen's ruined coat, pulling him closer, and for one suspended moment, the danger, the conspiracy, the entire empire outside that door ceased to exist. They broke apart breathless, foreheads still close, neither quite willing to be the one to step back first. Dawn brought no reprieve. Lu Yen was still bandaged, still exhausted, when the sound of carriage wheels echoed up the estate drive, grand, unmistakable, bearing a crest neither Kaelen nor his household had seen in over 3 years. Mira went pale the moment she recognized it, rushing to Kaelen's side. "That's the Rel family crest," she said, voice tight with disbelief. "Celine's family." "That's Elias," Kaelen finished, his whole body going rigid. "Ren's uncle. I thought he died at the border 2 years ago." The carriage doors opened, and a man stepped down, golden, composed, smiling with the practiced warmth of someone who had never once been denied anything in his life. "Kaelen, it's been too long, though I suppose grief keeps a man from writing letters." Elias's voice carried across the entryway like he'd rehearsed the warmth in it. He clasped Kaelen's hand between both of his, eyes already glistening. "I heard about the attack at your gala, and came the moment I could arrange the carriage. After losing my sister, I couldn't bear the thought of losing her son too. You understand, this family has suffered enough." "You were declared dead 2 years ago," Kaelen said flatly. "A misunderstanding at the border, nothing more. I spent months recovering somewhere far too remote for letters." Elias's gaze swept the hall, landing on Lu Yen with polite, practiced curiosity. "And this must be the spouse everyone's been discussing so intently since last night." "Lu Yen," Kaelen said, an edge in his voice that hadn't been there a moment before. "Of course." Elias's smile didn't waver, though something calculating flickered briefly beneath it. "I only wish we were meeting under gentler circumstances. An assassination attempt in your own ballroom, with my nephew present." He shook his head, voice dropping into practiced sorrow. "Celine would be devastated to know her son still isn't safe, even now." Lu Yen watched him carefully. Every sentence Elias spoke circled back to his own grief, his own suffering, his own burden. Never the boy standing frightened in the doorway, watching a stranger claim to love him. "I've already spoken with the magistrate," Elias continued smoothly. "Given last night's events, I believe it's only responsible that Ren come under my guardianship until this household proves itself capable of protecting him." "You have no legal claim," Kaelen said. "I have blood," Elias replied, gentle as a blade slid and slow. "And a court that remembers exactly how young this household stability truly is." Ren, who had been silent this entire exchange, suddenly bolted from the doorway. Not toward the golden uncle offering rescue, but straight into Lu Yan's side, small arms locking around his waist with a desperation that silenced the room. "Don't make me go," Ren whispered, voice cracking. "I want to stay with Mama." Elias's expression flickered. The first genuine break in his composure since he'd arrived. "He's confused," he said quickly. "Grief does strange things to children. He'll understand, in time, that I only want what's." "He understands exactly what he wants," Lu Yen said, kneeling to wrap an arm around Ren without breaking eye contact with Elias. "He wants to stay somewhere he isn't a story someone else gets to write for their own benefit." Something cold passed behind Elias's eyes before the warmth slid smoothly back into place. "I understand this is difficult," he said, voice syrup-soft again. "I'll return tomorrow, once emotions have settled, to discuss this properly with the magistrate present." He turned to go, and it was then, in the careless half-sentence he tossed over his shoulder to Kaelen, that Lu Yen caught it. "After all," Elias said, "it's been nearly 2 years since Celine passed. Long enough that people forget how quickly grief turns to neglect." 2 years. Lu Yan's blood went cold. Ren was 3. Celine had died giving birth to him, which meant her death wasn't 2 years ago. It was 3. Elias had gotten his own sister's timeline wrong, the kind of mistake no grieving brother would make by accident. Which meant either Elias hadn't actually been at the border for 2 years like he claimed, or he hadn't been mourning Celine as long as he wanted everyone to believe. Lu Yen didn't have time to decide what that meant before Kaelen moved. Kaelen stepped forward, past Lu Yen, past Ren, straight toward the assembled household staff, and the 2 guards still stationed at the door. Witnesses enough to matter. He dropped to one knee in front of Lu Yen, taking his hand with a formality that silenced every whisper in the hall. "Before this court, before witnesses who can carry word to the magistrate himself," Kaelen said, voice steady, "I bond myself to Lu Yen. Fully, irrevocably. No claim on this house, or this child, stands above that bond." Lu Yen stared at him, breath caught somewhere between shock and something far more dangerous than fear. Elias's composed smile finally, unmistakably cracked. "You don't have to do this," Lu Yen murmured, close enough that only Kaelen could hear. "There are other ways to fight him. Not fast enough ones." Kaelen's hand tightened around his. "Do you trust me?" "Yes." The word left Lu Yen before he'd even finished deciding it was true. The ceremony itself was simple, ancient, stripped of the pageantry of formal court bonds. Just Kaelen's wrist bared against Lu Yan's, the old words spoken low, and then the moment their scents finally, fully intertwined. Lu Yan had expected it to feel clinical, strategic, a means to an end. Instead, warmth spread through his chest like sunlight breaking through months of cold. And beside him he felt Kaelen go still with something that looked suspiciously like relief. That wasn't performance, Kaelen said quietly, once the witnesses had dispersed. Not for me. No, Lu Yan admitted. It wasn't for me either. He didn't get long to sit with the warmth of that. That evening, a servant delivered a message requesting Lu Yan's presence in the East Garden. Unsigned, but he already knew who'd sent it. Elias was waiting among the hedges, all pretense of grief finally gone from his face. You're sharper than the version of you I read about, he said without preamble. Lu Yan's blood went cold. Read about? Come now. You've been careful, but not careful enough. Elias's smile turned thin. The original Lu Yan wept and begged and let himself be led straight to that execution block. Poison in his hands, guilt on his face, exactly as I arranged it. I expected the same weak little Omega this time. Instead, I got someone who diagnoses conspiracies before they've fully unfolded. You killed Celine, Lu Yan said. It wasn't a question anymore. I removed an obstacle. Elias's voice stayed conversational, chillingly calm. My sister was going to expose certain debts I'd rather stayed buried. Ren was simply collateral I could use afterward. A grieving uncle, a sympathetic court, guardianship that would have given me control of everything Kaelen built. His eyes narrowed. You've disrupted 3 years of careful work in a matter of months. Then you should have been more careful with your timeline, Lu Yan said. 2 years since Celine died? She died birthing Ren. He's 3. Something flickered. The first real crack in Elias's composure, quickly smoothed over. A slip. Nothing more. A slip that proves you weren't mourning her nearly as long as you claim. Lu Yan held his gaze steady, unshaken. I know exactly how this story was supposed to end, Elias. I know every move you've already made and most of the ones you haven't yet. That's an advantage you don't have. He turned to leave before Elias could recover, already assembling the trap in his mind. The custody hearing tomorrow would be the perfect stage to expose him publicly, using the very timeline inconsistency Elias had handed him. He found Kaelen waiting near the study that night, expression unreadable in the candlelight. You knew things tonight you shouldn't have, Kaelen said carefully. About Celine. About him. Ways of speaking, sometimes, that don't match anyone raised in this empire. His eyes searched Lu Yan's face, not with suspicion exactly, with something closer to careful wonder. Who are you, really? Lu Yan's pulse spiked. This was the moment the mission would have told him to lie, deflect, protect the secret at any cost. He didn't. Someone who doesn't belong here, Lu Yan said quietly. Not the way you think I do. I can't explain it fully. I'm not sure you'd believe me if I tried. But everything I've done for Ren, everything between us, none of it was a lie. Kaelen was silent for a long moment. Then, instead of the accusation Lu Yan braced for, he simply reached out and laced their fingers together. Then it doesn't matter where you came from, Kaelen said. Only that you stayed. The custody hearing convened at midday, the court hall packed with nobles eager for spectacle. Lu Yan had barely finished laying out the timeline inconsistency before the magistrate's eyes when Elias's composure finally, publicly shattered. You think exposing one mistake unravels everything I've built? Elias's voice had lost all its practiced warmth. He crossed the floor in 3 fast strides, seizing Ren from where he stood beside Mira, a blade suddenly gleaming at the boy's throat before a single guard could move. One more step, Elias said, eyes wild now, fixed on Kaelen. And the boy who ruined everything finally dies where he should have 3 years ago. Everyone in this hall already knows what you are, Elias. Killing him now just proves it faster. Lu Yan's voice cut through the frozen silence, calm in a way that made Elias's blade hand falter, just slightly. Beside him, Kaelen hadn't moved, every muscle coiled, waiting. Don't test me, Elias snapped, but his eyes flicked toward the crowd, toward the nobles who'd once adored him, now staring in open horror. That's the thing about you, Lu Yan said, taking one slow step closer, hands visible, unthreatening. You never wanted power quietly. You wanted to be loved for taking it. That's why you came back playing grieving uncle instead of just disappearing with him. You need them to watch you be the hero. He nodded toward the court. Look at them, Elias. Do they look like they're watching a hero right now? Elias's gaze snapped toward the crowd, and in that half-second of distraction, Kaelen moved. He crossed the distance in a single stride, seizing Elias's wrist and wrenching the blade away from Ren's throat with brutal, controlled force. Ren was pulled clear, sobbing, into Myra's arms before Elias even hit the floor, Kaelen's knee pinning him flat as guards swarmed in. The poison you used on Celine, Lu Yan said, kneeling briefly beside Elias's restrained form, voice pitched for the whole court to hear, leaves a signature in the blood for years afterward. I'd wager the same physician you paid to drug Ren still has a record of exactly what he used, and exactly who purchased it. Old Sue, still under guard near the hearing chamber's edge, went pale and nodded once, silent confirmation enough. The court's murmurs turned to outrage, the last of Elias's manufactured sympathy collapsing in real time. "Take him," Kaelen said, voice flat with finality. "Every charge. Every witness. Let the court see exactly what kind of man wore grief like a costume." Guards dragged Elias out, still shouting protests no one in that hall believed anymore. Ren's small sobs finally quieted once Lu Yen reached him, scooping him up despite his own healing shoulder, pressing a kiss to his damp hair. "You're safe," Lu Yen murmured. "I promised, didn't I?" Kaelen reached them a moment later, and for once didn't bother hiding anything in front of a watching court. He wrapped both arms around Lu Yen and Ren together, his scent unlocking fully, completely, no restraint left in it at all. Nobles who'd spent years fearing the untouchable duke watched him hold his family in the middle of a courtroom, like the rest of the world, had simply stopped existing. "It's over," Kaelen said quietly, forehead resting against Lu Yan's. "It's over," Lu Yen echoed and meant it. Weeks later, the estate had settled into something Lu Yen hadn't known this house was capable of: warmth, laughter, Ren's small footsteps running unafraid down halls that once made him flinch. Lu Yen stood at the window of the room where it had all begun, watching Ren chase Mira through the garden below, and didn't hear Kaelen approach until his arms wrapped around him from behind. "Regrets?" Kaelen murmured against his hair. "None," Lu Yen said honestly. "Not one." Below them, Ren looked up, spotted them both in the window, and waved with both arms. "Papa, Mama, come outside." Kaelen huffed a laugh against Lu Yan's shoulder, quiet, unguarded, entirely his own. "Coming," he called back, and meant it in every sense that mattered. They walked out together into the light, past the courtyard where, months ago, an execution block had once stood waiting for a story that never got the chance to finish. It stood empty now, unused, forgotten the way it always should have been. In the original story, I was the villain's scapegoat, written to die alone. But some endings are worth rewriting. One stubborn toddler, one broken tyrant, and one impossible love at a time.